Hi, I'm Lee. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to my vlog. Back in January, me and my husband, we flew out to Argentina and boarded the Celebrity Equinox for a 14-night cruise to Antarctica. And it honestly was the trip of a lifetime. And in this vlog, I'm going to talk about the 3 things that I loved most about the cruise and 3 things that I didn't love as much. So, let's get into it. Number 1 on the love list has got to be the itinerary. Now, full disclosure, before the cruise, I was a bit nervous about just the itinerary and how many days we had at sea. In total, it was a 14-night cruise and there was only 4, that's 3, and there was only 4 ports across the entire 14 days. The ports were Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world, the Falkland Islands, Puerto Madryn and Montevideo. And because it was 14 nights with only 4 port days, I did wonder whether cruise would mean that we would be trapped inside the ship for a lot of the cruise and there wouldn't be too much to do. And I'm really pleased to say that couldn't have been further from the truth. Celebrity did a fantastic job of packing out the itinerary every day on the ship so that there was enough to do and to keep it interesting. With it just being a scenic cruise of Antarctica, I did wonder whether we'd actually get to see any real bits of Antarctica or whether it would just be a kind of a vision in the distance. And what we actually saw throughout the entire time that we were in Antarctica over those 3 days was just breathtaking. On the morning that we arrived in Antarctica, we'd spent the morning in the solarium, just relaxing, waiting to see kind of what Antarctica would look like. And slowly but surely, there was fewer and fewer people in the solarium, so I realised at that point we must be reaching Antarctica. And as I stood up from the lounger and looked out the windows, all I saw was this mass of land ahead of me. And I can honestly say it was more than I was expecting. It was just a vision in the distance, and it really was a sight to behold. At that point, I put my hat on, put my fleece on, and went out onto the decks and just marvelled at what I was seeing. And then the next 2 days in Antarctica, experiencing the sights, the sounds, the scenery, the penguins, the whales, the icebergs, in fact. It was honestly much more than I was expecting. We got really lucky on the cruise though, because whilst we were in Antarctica, the weather was clear, it was sunny. We got to just see the incredible scenery in front of us, behind us, all around us. While we were in Antarctica, unfortunately, we had a change of itinerary because there was a medical emergency on board, and that meant we were unable to visit Elephant Island, which was meant to be the second day of our time in Antarctica. Instead of that, Captain Leo decided that we would visit Half Moon Bay, and Half Moon Bay was just incredible. And I'm so pleased that we got to visit Half Moon Bay. It was the first time that Celebrity had ever stopped or sailed by Half Moon Bay. And within that port that morning, we were having breakfast in the Ocean View Cafe. We just saw penguins. We saw Gentoo penguins jumping out of the water right next to the ship whilst we were having breakfast. And it was one of those moments where I wanted to pinch myself because it didn't feel like I was really witnessing what I was witnessing. Because you see Antarctica on TV, you see it in a David Attenborough documentary, but to be there and to just see the vastness ahead of us and the wildlife, it more than met the expectations I had going into the cruise. And for that reason, the itinerary has to be the number 1 spot of the things that I love most about the cruise. One thing though that I will call out, and it's the first thing on my things I didn't love as much list, and that was the shore excursion we did in Ushuaia. This was the first time that I'd ever done a shore excursion through the cruise line. On other cruises that I've done in the past, I tend to get off the ship and do a self-explore. But for this cruise, we had quite a large amount of onboard credit to spend. And looking through the list of excursions that were available, one of them was to go to the Tierra del Fuego, which is a national park in Ushuaia. The excursion itself was a 5-hour excursion, and because of that, I thought it was better to do a excursion with Celebrity to guarantee that we'd be able to get off the ship and back on the ship in time before we left port. Our short excursion was due to start at 10 a.m. We were told to meet in the theatre at 10 a.m. It was almost 11 o'clock by the time we were escorted off the ship and put on a bus to go to the Tierra del Fuego. And each of the 4 locations that we visited were stunning, and I'm so glad that I got to see them. However, I would have liked to have spent more time in each location to really experience and see more of it, because the actual reality was it was more of a photo opportunity in each of the 4 locations in the 10 to 20 minutes that we got to spend in each place before getting back on the bus and going to the next location. And there was also a large number of other tour groups happening at the same time, so it did just feel a bit chaotic. I was left feeling disappointed by the time we got back to the ship. My advice, if you were doing this cruise, would be look for something that probably meets your needs more than this excursion did for me. Now, some of that I will take the blame for. I probably should have done a bit more research before I booked it through Celebrity just to see what the excursion would entail. I'm still pleased we got to experience it. I'm still pleased we got to see Ushuaia and see the Tierra del Fuego, because it was and is stunning. I would have just liked to have spent more time there to see more of it. That's why it's number one on the things that I didn't love as much list. If I contrast that to the independent excursion that I did whilst we were in the Falkland Islands in Port Stanley, the independent excursion was booked through Viator with Travel Falklands, and our guide Caps was fantastic. Because of the medical emergency that happened in Antarctica, that meant we were late arriving in the Falkland Islands. Now, Travel Falklands went out of their way to make sure that we got to do this excursion. On the excursion, we had, I think it was 8 people in total with our guide, and we got to go to different bays around the Falkland Islands and see 3 types of penguin. It really was a fantastic tour through Travel Falklands. The guide Caps gave us some great insight into what life on the Falkland Islands was actually like. As beautiful as the Falkland Islands were, I'm not sure whether I would be able to live there. It might be just a bit too remote for me, and the winters do sound more than a little harsh. So number 2 on my love list, it's got to be the Equinox itself. The Equinox, despite being a 17-year-old ship, was in fantastic shape. We first sailed on the Equinox back in 2023. And at that point, I thought she was looking a bit tired in places. The Long Club on deck 15 was looking tatty. It was looking tired. However, in 2024, she went through dry dock, and the changes made are so noticeable. While in dry dock, they removed some of the lawn area of the Lawn Club and replaced it with comfy seating and chairs, and it just made the area to the either side of the sunset bar more desirable to sit in. Back in 2023, people would just walk past the lawn and not use it, whereas now that area gets used every single day, and those spaces became one of my favourite places just to get a drink, sit in one of the comfy round rocking chairs and just watch the waves go by. Around those spaces, they've also got lots of blankets so that if you want to wrap up and just watch the waves go by and stay warm, you can do that as well. But even the rest of the ship, all the public spaces around the ship were in fantastic condition. Some of the woodwork and the decor around the ship, I think, does date it and show that it is 17 years old. However, it still looks great, it still looks elegant, and the ship is such a welcoming place to be. Stepping back onto the Equinox, it felt like we were returning home. And I know that sounds a bit wanky, but this was our 5th cruise with Celebrity on a Solstice class ship, and because of that, there was such a familiar feel around the ship of knowing where everything was that it instantly felt like we were back home when we boarded. The Equinox does look fantastic, and long may she sail. I know Celebrity at the moment are revolutionising their Solstice class ships, so there's a very good chance the Equinox is going to be sailing the seas for a long time to come, and I for one am so happy about that, and I can't wait to get back onto the Equinox in the future. Special mention also, whilst we talk about the ship and things that I loved, the crew. The crew were fantastic. Manuel, the cruise director, is a very funny man, and he was a highlight of the cruise. If you're on a Celebrity cruise in the future and Manuel is the cruise director, you'll definitely be in for a very good time. Sticking with the theme of the ship, next on the things I didn't love as much, it's got to be the balcony on our room. So we had a sunset balcony on this cruise, and we booked it specifically because of the type of cruise that it was. It's a scenic cruise, and to make sure we had the best views possible from our room. And the views were incredible. Unfortunately, the balcony itself, it was tired. There was chip paint on the walls. The furniture was had holes in it. It was dirty, and it just looked like it hadn't been taken care of, which is such a contrast to how the rest of the ship looked. We spoke to our room attendant about it. He explained that the balconies at the rear of the ship get more dirty because of the soot that falls from the funnels as the ship's sailing. Now, they don't tell you that when you book a sunset balcony, and because it is considered a premium room, to hear that actually it gets dirtier more than the other balconies does was disappointing. But dirt can be cleaned. My issue was more so that the furniture had holes in it. The chairs couldn't recline because the cable tied them shut, and all the paintwork was chipped. And when you were walking on the balcony, you basically were getting chip paint in your feet. I raised the issues to guest services, and it took them until day 5 to send a maintenance crew to repaint the balcony and make it look better. Now, to give Celebrity some credit, they did apologise. They gave us a rather nice future cruise credit and also a free meal in a specialty restaurant. So they did turn it around, they did make it better, but it's just a shame that the first 5 days of the cruise, the balcony was in a state of disrepair. And that brings me to the third thing on my loved list, and it's got to be the food. I was really, really impressed by the food on this cruise. We had select dining on this cruise, and I pre-booked our dining room slots in the app before we boarded, and that just meant that we had the peace of mind that we would get to eat at the time that we like to eat at. Had I not done that, there was definitely enough availability for walk-ups to get a table rather quickly. If there was no space at that point, they would give you a beeper and you could go and sit in a bar or a lounge and they would beep to say when you had a table ready. The 2 previous cruises before this one that we've done were with Virgin Voyages, and Virgin Voyages food blew my mind with just how consistently good it was throughout both of those cruises. And coming back to Celebrity, I did wonder whether Celebrity's food would live up to that of Virgin's. I think for the large part, they did. The main dining room food was mostly excellent. There was only one night where I thought the service was slower than normal, but that's because it was a lobster night. And when you get a lobster, the waiter has to de-shell it for you. And I think that slowed things down slightly. But the food was consistently good throughout the entire cruise in the main dining room. My favourite meal was on the first night though. It was the jerk chicken and pineapple rice. Oh, it was so good. And that just set the tone for the rest of the cruise. But every night in the main dining room, I was really impressed by the food that we had. In addition to eating in the main dining room, we also had 4 speciality meals throughout the cruise. We had 2 meals in Murano, 1 meal in Sushi on 5, and 1 meal in the Tuscan Grill. One of the meals in Murano was the free meal that we were given because of the complaint we made about the balcony. In both occasions, the food was excellent. Everything about the meals in Murano was just incredible. Murano is probably one of my favourite restaurants at sea, if not one of my favourite restaurants I've ever been to. Special mention also to Sushi on 5. Sushi on 5, we've had meals in there every Celebrity cruise that we've been on so far, and every time the food is exceptional. Being a creature of habit, I did get the same food that I'd had on the previous cruises, which is a Kobe beef slider burger and a pork ramen. Oh, it's so good. And then that brings me to the Tuscan Grill. So the good about the Tuscan Grill is the location. It's right at the back of the ship. You get fantastic views out the windows of the wake. So the Tuscan Grill wasn't my favourite. It was the second time that we've had meals in the Tuscan Grill across the 5 Celebrity cruises that we've done. And both times I've walked away going, it was nice. Do I think it was worth the additional cost of a speciality meal? Probably not. I think the food in the main dining room is better. Quality of the food in the Ocean View Cafe was also consistently excellent. Since our last Celebrity cruise back in 2023, I do think the quality of the food in the Ocean View Cafe is much better than it was 3 years ago. And the third and final thing on the things that I didn't love as much, I'm sad to say, it's got to be the headline acts in the theatre. So the showcast team and the production cast shows that the Celebrity put on were excellent. We had Live, Broadway Cabaret, Topper, and Feel the Funk. And each of those I thoroughly enjoyed. Unfortunately though, the headline acts that Celebrity had booked for the other nights when the showcast team were on, they just didn't really do it for me. And I think that is more personal preference than a reflection on the performers not being talented, but it just wasn't for me. We had an Argentine tango dancers, who did 2 shows throughout the cruise. We had, how can I describe him? He was a Irish dancing Elvis impersonator. He wasn't an Elvis impersonator, but he sang like rock and roll music of Elvis's era. And I just thought that was weird, because halfway through a song he'd start Irish dancing and like, what am I watching? It felt like a bit of a fever dream. Third headline act, she was called Lindsay Hamilton. She's a West End performer. Her show was super fun. She has a great singing voice and she was very funny throughout the show. But those 3 headline acts, I was just kind of left disappointed. I do think that the overall showcast were underused. You've got people who can do acrobatics and all these wonderful things, and they don't really get an opportunity to show off those skills, or they didn't on this cruise anyway. There was a session musician called Chloe Jones, who is from the UK in Manchester. She was excellent. We would often go to the Sky Lounge and watch her perform a solo set. And also there was a DJ who would play music on sea days around the pool, and I enjoyed him. I enjoyed the sets that he played, but overall, I just think the entertainment was lacking. And that was a shame. That was a real shame. And for a bonus thing that I didn't love as much, I'm actually going to go as far as to say I hated, and it was frustrating every time I had to use the thing, it's this water machine. This water machine in the solarium was dreadful to use. It's got a sensor where if you activate the sensor, it should make water. It should give you water. However, the sensor didn't really work so well. So every time you went to get a drink or fill up a water bottle or a glass, you'd spend a good few seconds trying to maneuver your hand or the glass or your water bottle in the right location so that you would be able to get water. And even then, if you did get it in the right sweet spot, it would just give you a dribble of water rather than a full glass. But those are minor things that I didn't love as much about the cruise. Overall, it was the trip of a lifetime. And if you get the opportunity to do an Antarctic cruise with Celebrity on the Equinox or one of their other ships in the future, I would absolutely recommend it to you. This cruise lived up to high expectations and it met them in every single way. We were so lucky with the itinerary, we were so lucky with the weather, we were so lucky with the food, and we were so lucky that we got to do it. So if you get the opportunity to go to Antarctica with Celebrity, or you're thinking about it, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. But until next time, bye for now.